Welcome 3D Design students. In this series of lessons we're going to use some more tools in Maya to create a nice pastoral meadow scene like this. We're going to use the Sculpt tools in Maya to create this landscape. And we're going to use an advanced particle system in Maya called Mesh to create the grass. And we're going to use what are called procedural or parametric techniques to create these rocks here. And we're going to use opacity maps to create this plant and the leaves on this tree. This tree is part of a system in Maya called brushes, and we'll learn a little bit about that. And finally, the water will also use procedural techniques to create the waves. Procedural or parametric techniques are used to modify geometry based on either textures or computer-generated algorithms. You apply the map or the texture or the process and adjust its parameters to modify the geometry, and that's why it's called parametric. When we use a computer-generated map such as noise with a displacement node on the material, we can also get some interesting effects like waves on water or a rocky texture. So let's get started. In this video we're going to create the landscape. So here you can see I have my landscape. I've got it in wireframe right now because these processes are very demanding on the computer. So when you can, you're going to want to work in wireframe. As you can see, here are my rock meshes here. Here's my landscape mesh. Here are my rocks sort of embedded in the landscape. Here's my fern that's made of some planes that have an opacity map and a fern leaf texture applied to them. Here's the tree trunk. Here are the tree leaves, which are polygons with the same kind of opacity map set up. And here's the water plane right here. As you can see, it's sort of underneath the ground to some degree, and we have a depression in the ground that the water is sort of filling. Over here are the grass objects, and as you can see, they are also planes. And you don't see them in the wireframe view because they are scattered as instances across the landscape using the MASH particle system. So the very first thing you should do before you start this project is create a new project folder. So go to File, Project Window, New, name it something. Make sure you know where it's going. I'm going to put mine on my desktop. You should put yours in your class folder that's on your OneDrive. And click Accept. And then go to File, Set Project, and make sure that Maya is synced to the project folder you just created. And then let's create our landscape plane. Create a plane, and then scale it up. You can make it long if you want. And then let's go to the polyplane node and give it quite a few length and width segments, maybe 50 and 50. And this will allow us to smoothly deform it with the Sculpt tools. And then come up to your shelves and find the sculpting shelf. Now in here are all sorts of different brushes, and all these brushes do different things. They let you treat a mesh like digital clay. We're going to use this first one here, lift a surface, and I encourage you to play with all of these. And when you select that, you may or may not see your brush. If you don't see your brush, you should zoom way out until you do see it. And then of course you can hold down B, just like with soft selection, and click your left mouse button, and drag left and right to resize the brush. I'm going to make my brush sort of big to begin with and zoom out so I can see the whole plane. And you should also bring up the tool settings here because you're going to want to look at these, particularly the strength and the invert checkbox here. I'm going to start by clicking a couple times on this plane, and you can see that I'm creating indentations when I click my left mouse button. I can click and hold it and drag and create a continuous indentation if I want. I'm going to undo these. And the reason I'm creating indentations is because I have the invert box checked. I'm going to uncheck that. Then I'm going to click and begin to create extrusions all over my plane. And the extrusions I'm creating by just clicking very briefly all over this thing. I do not click and hold. I'm just clicking very briefly, a bunch of little clicks, I like to say. And if I want to build up a hill, then I just continually click in the same spot. You can vary the size of your brush as well. To get some interesting effects. Now, I'm going to put my pond right here. So I'm going to check the invert box and begin to push that area down. Now if you find that your surface got a little too lumpy, then you can use the smooth tool, which is the next tool in the sculpting shelf. I'm going to pull the strength down here on this one, and then I'm going to make my brush a little bigger, and I'm just going to sort of drag the brush over here and kind of smooth out some of the lumps that I made. Now what we need to do is create a material for this. So let's go to the Select tool, or push W on your keyboard to turn off the sculpting tool, and select your plane. And let's go ahead and delete the history while we're here. And then let's right click and select Assign New Material. And we're going to use an Arnold Standard Surface Shader. And then you're going to want to find a seamless grass texture to apply to your meadow. I use textures.com. You should have an account for this already. Search for grass and then find a nice, bright, seamless grass texture. You don't want one with a lot of rocks or anything like that in it that might repeat, because we're going to tile this thing. Click on it and then download it. And make sure that you put it in the Source Images folder of your project folder that you created. And then of course you just come to the color node, click the little checker button, select File, and then click the folder, and that should bring up your Maya browser right to the Source Images folder that you selected. If you don't see your texture in here, then you need to check this button here, Textured, in your viewport. And there you have your texture applied, but you can see it looks a little big. So while you're still in this node here, select Place 2D Texture, and then find the Repeat, which is right here, and maybe try something different. I think 5 looks good for me. And you should have something that looks like this. Before we leave this video, I want to show you in the tool settings for the Sculpt tool here, you can also come down here and select a stamp. And if you click Pick Stamp, you'll get quite an assortment of different things that you can paint or use to paint to create noise and stuff like that. I've used this one before. If we select this one, for example, that is what our brush will be using. So I'm going to go ahead and make the brush kind of smallish. There it is. You can see it hardly. And then we're going to paint with this brush using this stamp, just so you can see what that looks like. So I'm going to turn off my texture here in the viewport so you can see this a little better. But you can see when I begin to paint, you can see that texture coming through in the brush. This is a good way to add a little more detail to your scene. So when we come back, we'll set up and use a mesh particle system to scatter the grass over the meadow. And I'll see you then.